They denied a black colonel's flight while he escorted a fallen soldier's remains. They regretted it. A colonel's journey to lay a brother in arms to rest is interrupted by prejudice. The consequences came fast. Don't miss the next chapter. Subscribe today. Where are you watching this from? Tell us in the comments. Elijah Carter stepped out of the taxi, the weight of his mission settling on his shoulders like the Emmental's on his chest. The cacophony of airport life surrounded him, engines sidling luggage, wheels scraping over concrete and passengers hustling toward their destinations. It was a bright afternoon, the sun high in the sky, but Elijah's thoughts were far from the light. His gaze dropped to the papers in his hand, the documents for transporting the body of his fallen comrade. The soldier in that coffin wasn't just anyone, Private First Class Thomas Keller had been Elijah's closest friend, a white man who treated Elijah like a brother on and off the battlefield. They shared meals, laughs, and the grim reality of combat, and when Keller had been fatally wounded in a surprise attack overseas, Elijah had sworn he would personally escort his body back to his hometown for a proper burial. Nothing was going to stop him from fulfilling that promise. Elijah had adjusted his military dress, uniform, polished shoes, clicking against the pavement as he walked toward the terminal entrance. His metal shard-earned symbols of valor reflected the sunlight, but instead of feeling pride, he carried the heaviness of loss. As he reached the entrance, he inhaled deeply, preparing himself for what he hoped would be a smooth journey inside the terminal. The environment shifted. Screens displayed flight schedules, and the smell of coffee from nearby kiosks mixed with the scent of jet fuel lingering from the open runway doors. People were in transit, lost in their own worlds. Elijah's uniform turned some heads, but none stopped to salute or offer words of gratitude. That didn't surprise him. At the check-in, a young woman with a tight bun and crisp uniform greeted him with a forced smile. Ticket and an eye. Please. Elijah handed over his documents along with his military ID. I'm here to transport a military casket, said his voice low but steady. Private First Class Thomas Keller, everything is arranged. The woman scanned the document, her smile fading. Her eyes flicked up to meet this suspicious and guarded. You're the officer in charge to sift the ideas or prisoned her. Yes, I am. Elijah swore, keeping his tongue calm. He'd been through this before. The subtle doubt people harbored when they saw a black man in uniform. The woman handed the papers back with a slight groan. A moment's, I need to check some things. He leaned toward her colleague, whispering something Elijah couldn't make out. Thought the tone was unmistakable. Suspicion. Both women glanced at him before one of them picked up the phone, muttering into the receiver. Elijah felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He could tell when someone was fishing for trouble. He'd seen that look enough times in his life to recognize it instantly. Standing tall, he waited, hands clasped behind his back, focusing on the promise he had made to Keller. Minutes stretched. Passengers moved around, indeed oblivious to the tension brewing at the counter. Eventually another employee appeared, a middle-aged man with a stiff posture and a scowl. He approached Elijah with an air of authority, looking him up and down. Colonel Carter, is it? The man asked, glancing at the papers in Elijah's hand, as if expecting them to vanish. We just need to do a routine verification. Elijah clenched his jaw, holding back the frustration rising inside him. Everything is in order. All the paperwork is there. You need to board the flight as soon as possible. The family is waiting for the arrival. The man gave him a once-over, his expression flat. I'm going to need to see that ID again, he said, as if Elijah's uniform and medals weren't enough proof. Elijah compiled without a word, retrieving his ID from his pocket. The man took it with deliberate slowness, inspecting it as though it were counterfeit. Every second felt like a slap to Elijah's dignity. After an uncomfortably long pause, the man handed the ID back with a shrug. It looks fine, but I need to call security just a precaution. Elijah's heart sank. Security? For what policy? The man said, giving a tight-lipped smile. We need to ensure everything checks out. Elijah stood his ground, though anger simmered beneath it. Scowl exterior. He could see where this was going. Despite his rank, his medals, and his mission, they saw only one thing: a black man. They found hard to believe. Minutes later, 2 security officers arrived, their body languages stiff and unfriendly. With a mastocky man with a shaved head immediately took control. What's the issue here? The employee gestured toward Elijah. This gentleman is claiming to be a clone escorting a military casket. We need to verify his credentials. The officer gave Elijah a hard look, arms crossed over his chest. Colonel who? Need to see your papers. Elijah extended the documents again, keeping his voice even. All the necessary paperwork is here. This is a transport of military honor. The officer flipped through the document, his expression unreadable. Looks official, but we're going to need to take you to secondary screening. Secondary screening? Elijah repeated, his tone laced with disbelief. I have everything in order. The officer didn't flinch. It's just protocols. Or Elijah knew better. This wasn't about protocol, it was about control, about reminding him where they thought the student. He hierarchy. Swallowing his pride, he nodded. Fine. They led him through the terminal past curious passengers and murmuring staff to a small screening room tucked away from public view. The room smelled of stale air and cleaning chemicals. Tall tables stood in the center, surrounded by war chairs. "Place your belongings on the table," one officer instructed. Elijah followed the orders, unclipping his medals and placing them alongside his document. His heart ached as she laid down the small token Keller's wife had given him, a dog tag engraved with Keller's name and service number. They searched him methodically, their hands cold and indifferent. They even checked the folded flag he carried as if it might conceal something sinister. When the search was complete, one of the officers gave a curtain. "You're clear, Colonel." Elijah picked up his things, reattaching the medals to his uniform with slow precision. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the weight of frustration. The officers didn't apologize, nor did they offer an explanation. They simply opened the door, expecting him to leave as if nothing had happened. Elijah straightened his back, slipping Keller's dog tag into his pocket. Without a word, he walked out of the room, the promise to his friend burning brighter than ever in his heart. No matter what obstacles lay ahead, he would get Keller home this year. Entered the bustling terminal, his eyes scanned, and the departure board. His flight was delayed. Another obstacle, another test of his patience. But Elijah wasn't going to let anything stop him. With a deep breath, Head adjusted his hat and strode toward the gate. The journey was far from over, and he knew the hardest part still to come. Elijah sat in the waiting area, his back straight, despite the exhaustion weighing down on him. His military posture never faltered. Devin thought the frustration inside simmered. The overhead speakers droned flight updates, most of which faded into background noise. But Elijah heard nothing other than the ticking of the clock in his mind. Each second spent in this airport was another moment to lend from his mission to bring Keller home. He pulled out Keller's dog tag from his pocket, running a thumb over the engraved name, the memory of that last conversation with his friendly nerd, a reminder of the promise he was determined to keep. No matter how many obstacles they threw in his path, he would fulfill his duty. "Colonel Carter," the curt voice jolted him from his thoughts. She looked up to see two security guards standing over him. One was a burly man with a shaven head, the other a wiry younger officer who looked eager to prove something. "You're coming with us," the older officer barked. There was no politeness, only an undercurrent of hostility. Elijah stood slowly, maintaining a calm expression. "Is there a problem?" The officers neared. "Routine procedures. I run less. You've got areas on to make it difficult." Elijah felt this jaw tighten, but he nodded. He had no time for arguments. "Not now. Lead the way." They guided him toward a smaller security room, the fluorescent lights sing faintly above. Elijah entered the room first, but before he could venture around, the door shut behind him with a sharp click. "All right, hands on the table," the younger officer ordered, his voice sharper than necessary. Elijah placed his hand flat on the cold metal table. The officers circled him like wolves. Their movements deliberate and slow. It wasn't just a search. It was a performance, one meant to humiliate. "Spread your legs," the older guard added. Elijah followed the instructions, his face unreadable, though his fists clenched slightly. They patted him down, paying excessive attention to every fold of his uniform. When they reached his medals, the younger officers nodded, fingering one of the highest distinctions. "So these make you special, huh?" Elijah didn't respond, meeting the officer's gaze with a cold, unwavering stare. The guards smirked but looked away first, clearly unsettled. "This one thinks she's above the rules," the older guard muttered as she finished the search. Elijah exhaled slowly, keeping his temper in check. He had seen worse on the battlefield. He would not break here. "Yours to stand, soldier," the younger guard taunted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "No," Elijah replied quietly, thought the weight of the word carriers of practiced restraint. The guard leaned closer, his breath hot with contempt. "Good, because we can fix that real quick." For a brief moment, Elijah considered his options. She knew they were baiting him, waiting for him to lash out so they could justify escalating things, but he refused to give them that satisfaction before anything more could happen. The doors swung open abruptly. "Is there a problem here?" A deep, commanding voice filled their room. All heads turned to see an elderly man standing in the doorway. He was dressed in civilian clothes, but there was something unmistakably military in his demeanor, a veteran bearing the kind that spoke of battles fought and survived. The older guard stiffened. "This is a security procedures. Is there nothing to worry about?" The veteran's eyes narrowed as she took in the scene. Elijah standing stiffly, the guards looming too close. His gaze harpened. "That man is Colonel Elijah Carter. Served with him overseas." "What's the meaning of this?" The guards exchanged uneasy glance. "Cess, you were just harassing a decorated officer," the veteran snapped, cutting them off. "I'll make sure your supervisor hears about this." The tension in the room shifted, and for the first time since entering the airport, Elijah felt a flicker of relief. The veteran stepped forward and gave Elijah a firm handshake. "Good to see you, Colonel. It's been too long." Elijah returned the handshake, his expression softening. "Thank you." I appreciate it. The older guard cleared his throat awkwardly. You're free to go, sir. Elijah shot him a glance, his face unreadable. He knew an apology wasn't coming, but he didn't need one. Action spoke louder than words. The veteran gestured toward the door. Come on, let's get out of here. As Elijah left the room, he glanced back briefly at the guards who stood frozen, realizing they had misjudged the wrong man out in the terminal. Elijah and the veteran walked side by side. The veteran gave him a knowing look. They still don't make it easy for us, do they? Elijah shook his head, his voice low. No, they don't. The veteran clapped him on the back. But you hang in there. Keller's waiting. Elijah's throat tight. Ned, and for a moment they couldn't find the words. She gave the veteran a grateful nod, then continued toward his gate. The journey was far from over, but at least now Elijah had made it through one more obstacle. As she approached the departure area, he caught a glimpse of the flight board. His flight status blinked in bold red letters: delayed. Elijah closed his eyes briefly, willing himself to stay calm. He had come too far to let anything stop him. No matter how many roadblocks they put in his way, he would carry Keller home one step at a time. Elijah stood at the gate, dared let RSS spelling delayed on the screen, gnawing at his patience. Had checked the time. Every minute wasted in this airport felt like a personal insult. It wasn't just about. It was about Keller's family waiting on the other side, holding on to their grief, hoping to bury Thurston with honor. Elijah adjusted the collar of his uniform and approached the airline desk again, determined to get answers. The attendant at the desk, a young woman scrolling through her tablet, barely acknowledged him. Yes, she asked without looking up. My flight is delayed. You need information, Elijah said evenly, though his frustration threatened to surface. Had placed the documents on the counter, careful not to sound confrontational. The woman glanced at him, her expression flat. Everyone's flight is delayed, sire. You'll just have to wait, like everyone else. Elijah exhaled slowly, the knot in his chest tightening. This isn't just any flight. I'm transporting a military casket. There are specific protocols. Can you at least confirm the new departure time? The attendant shrugged, scrolling through the screen lazily. Look, I don't have anything new yet. Check back later. Her dismissive tone stunned, but Elijah remained composed. I need to ensure the casket is properly transferred. This isn't negotiable. With an exaggerated sigh, she finally made eye contact, irritation flickering in her gazes. I understand that you think your situation is special, but we're short-staffed. Maybe check with the cargo team if it's that important. Elijah's patience thinned, his pulse quickened, but he kept this voice measured. Give me the number for the cargo team. The woman tapped a few buttons, scrawled a number on a sticky note, and slid it across the counter. They have a good day. Her sarcasm was thinly veiled. Elijah tucked the note into his pocket and turned toward the nearest phone station. Asha dialed the number for cargo services. Amory surfaced, unbidden, a moment on the battlefield when Keller had taken Ab. I'll let me out for him. Keller's voice echoed in his mind. Get me home if anything happens. Elijah promised Smith that he had promised, and no amount of bureaucratic nonsense would stop him. Now the cargo team, however, proved to be just as unhelpful as the airline staff. Yeah, we know about the military transport, the voice on the other end of the line grumbled, but it's a busy day down here. We'll get to it when we get to it. Elijah gripped the receiver tighter. This isn't acceptable. You need confirmation that the casket is handled with care and transferred properly. Look, man. The cargo workers had clearly annoyed. Unless you want to come down here yourself, there's nothing more I can't tell you. He closed his eyes, summoning every ounce of patience he had left. Then tell me how to get to the cargo area. After a moment of silence, the worker begrudgingly gave him the directions. Elijah hung up the phone and strode towards the restricted section of the airport, who wasn't waiting for anyone's permission. He would see this through himself. The entrance of the cargo area. A security guard blocked his path. You can't be here, the guard said, folding high arms. Elijah showed his identification and explained the situation. I'm here for a military casket. You need to assure it's being properly transferred. The guard barely glanced at the ID. Rules are rules. You can't just waltz in. Elijah clenched his jaw. I have authorization. This is not optional. The guard leaned in, a sneer curling his lip. Maybe next time bring someone who looks the part. Elijah's blood ran cold at the blatant insult, but he didn't flinch. Get your supervisor now. The guard gave him a long, hard look, clearly debating whether to escalate the situation further. After a tense pause, he muttered under his breath and made a call on his radio. Got someone here who thinks she's important. Elijah waited, his fists clenched at his sides. Keller's dog tag in his pocket felt the ear by these conducive, urging him to keep moving forward. No matter what, the supervisor arrived after several agonizing minutes. She was an older man with tired eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Or what's the issue? Elijah explained the situation again, this time laying out every detail with military precision. The supervisor listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Elijah finished the manga of his low note, all right, I'll let you through, but I can't have you disrupting our operations. I'll stay out of your way. Elijah assured him, I just need to confirm everything is in order. The supervisor unlocked the gate, and Elijah stepped into the bustling cargo area. The sound of forklifts and the hum of machinery filled the space. He spotted Keller's casket draped in an American flag resting on a steel platform. Warleaf washed over him, but it was sure. Steve, door worker nearby, was loudly complaining to his colleague, can't believe we have to halt this thing around like it's something special, just another piece of cargo. If you ask me, Elijah's hands curled into fists, but it took a steadying breath confronting him to serve Keller's memory. Instead, he walked toward the caskets, straightening the edges of the flag. With deliberate care, he whispered under his breath, I've got you, brother, almost there. The man felt sacred, but it was interrupted by the sharp voice of another employee. Hey, you can't touch that, Elijah. Turned, meeting the man's gaze without fear. I'm Colonel Elijah Carter. This is my mission. Do you have a problem with that? The man opened his mouth to argue but closed it again when he saw the fire in Elijah's eyes. He muttered something under his breath and walked away, leaving Elijah alone with the casket, and some more with the cargo properly secured and the necessary forms double-checked. Elijah made his way back to the terminal. His phone buzzed as the gate a message from the airline informing him that the flight was further delayed. Elijah exhaled through his nose, frustration bubbling to the surface as she sat down. The weight of the day pressed heavily on his shoulders. The obstacles were piling up one after another, testing his patience and resolve. But he reminded himself that this wasn't just about the journey, it was about the promise. He made a promise he would keep no matter the cost. Elijah leaned back in the chair, glancing at the flashing delayed sign on. Some more, the world could throw all the roadblocks. As it wanted, he wasn't stopping. Not now. And over the airport terminal buzzed with restless energy as the hours dragged. Dawn delayed flights turned the waiting areas into makeshift camps with passengers sprawled across chairs and floors, frustrations simmering in the air. Elijah sat quietly, hands folded on his lap, his mind a battleground of exhaustion and determination. Every glance at the departure board tightened the knot in his chest. This mission to deliver Keller home felt like an uphill climb through layers of systemic disrespect and careless indifference. Just as Elijah thought that could catch a moment of peace, the silence around him was shattered by a commotion from behind. A group of passengers had gathered near the airline desk, murmuring and gesturing toward him. Phones were out recording. At first, Elijah didn't react. He had been the subject of unwanted attention before. A man in uniformal ways stood out in public. But this time something felt different. Is that the guy they were hassling earlier? Someone whispered loud enough for Elijah to hear. A colonel, right? They dragged off like a criminal. One by one passengers began whispering, phones raised to capture the supposed scandal. And nearby, a middle-aged traveler with a sleek tablet stepped forward and said, Hey sir, you okay? We saw what happened back there with security. Elijah gave a curt nod. Thank you, you don't look fine. The man replied, his eyes narrowing. They treated you like a suspect, not a soldier. That's not right. Before Elijah could respond, another passenger chimed in. I got it all on video. They had no reason to search you like that. Elijah shifted uncomfortably as more voices joined the conversation. Phones pointed at him from every angle, capturing his expression. He wanted to keep things under control. But his narrative was slipping away from him. Someone in the crowd muttered, if they can do that to a decorated officer, what chance do the rest of us have? A spark. Murmurs grew louder, frustration building into something volatile. By the time Elijah reached the gate again, the airport social media was already buzzing with hashtags, and outrage clips of his encounter with security were spreading fast. The videos shot from multiple angles showed him standing stoically as guards searched him with unnecessary force, their behavior drenched in disrespect. Elijah's phone vibrates repeatedly with notifications. Messages poured in from strangers expressing their disgust at how he had been treated. The situation was spiraling out of control, and Elijah knew it would only be a matter of time before journalists arrived. He wasn't wrong, or a small group of reporters appeared armed with cameras and microphones. They swarmed him as she waited at the gate, their questions sharp and relentless. Colonel Carter, can you comment on the treatment you received from airport security? Do you believe this incident reflects a large issue of discrimination against black servicemen? What message do you think this to their military personnel of color? Elijah kept this expression neutral. Though his pulse raced, he knew the media could twist words, and anything he said now could escalate the situation further. I have no comment, he said, calmly folding his arms. Colonel, please, our porter pressed, shoving a microphone closer to his face. The public wants to know, what do you have to say about this? Elijah exhaled slowly, fighting the urge to engage. No comment, repeated. But there Porters didn't back down. Another journalist, a woman with a determined expression, asked, "How do you feel knowing the airport staff treated you this way while you were on a mission to transport your friend's remains?" That question cut deep the emotions. Elijah had kept bottled up for hours, threat to spill over, but it clenched his jaw, refusing to let them see it. "No comment," he said one last time, his voice is steady but cold. While Elijah tried to distance himself from the media circus, the situation continued to unfold online. The clips of his mistreatment went viral with hashtags like #RespectOurHeroes and #Justice for Colonel Carter trending within hours. Thousands of comments flooded social media denouncing the airport's behavior and calling for accountability. Protests began to form outside the airport as news of the incident spread. Crowds of people holding signs that read "Honorable Soldiers and Equal Treatment" now gathered at the terminal entrance. The protests grew quickly, fueled by outrage over both the racial profiling and the disrespect toward a war hero. The chant "Respect our Soldiers" echoed through the airport walls, rattling the very structure of the institution that had wronged Elijah. Inside, airline staff and security grew visibly nervous. Management scrambled to contain the situation, but the crowd outside only grew louder. The pressure mounting. One of the reporters at the gate, sensing an opportunity, followed Elijah persistently. "Colonel, do you think the protest outside is justified? Do you believe this incident reflects systemic racism?" Elijah gave the journalist a sidelong glance. He knew the power of words, especially when they left his mouth. Any statement could become fuel for the fire. "I'm just here to bring my friend home," Elijah said quietly. That's all. His answer was simple, but the look in his eyes told a deeper story, a story of frustration, injustice, and unwavering resolve. Meanwhile, airport executives held an emergency meeting behind closed doors, desperately trying to find a way to manage the fallout. Passengers were restless, delayed further, and the protesters outside showed no signs of leaving. A growing sense of panic spread among the staff as videos continued circulating online, tarnishing the airport's reputation. With every retweet, management finally decided to release a generic public statement. "We're reviewing the events involving Colonel Carter and will ensure that all military personnel are treated with the utmost respect." But it was too little, too late. The public wasn't satisfied with empty words. They demanded real accountability. Back at the gate, Elijah sat in silence, watching the chaos around him unfold. The world had turned his personal mission into a public spectacle. Yet all he wanted was to get Keller home. As reporters hovered nearby, waiting for more sound bites, Elijah leaned back in his chair, exhausted but unyielding. The fight wasn't over, but he was prepared to see it through, no matter how long it took, no matter how many obstacles were thrown in his path. He would carry Keller home with dignity, with honor, and with the unwavering determination of a soldier who never backed down. The crowd outside the airport grew louder, their chants resonating through the terminal walls. Passengers pressed their faces against the windows to watch the growing protest. The demand for justice echoed through signs, voices, and online posts, painting Elijah Carter not only as a victim of discrimination, but as a symbol of a deeper, festering issue. Yet despite the noise, Elijah sat in silence near the gate, determined to stay focused on his mission. His calm exterior masked the storm brewing inside him. Then, just as things seemed to spiral beyond control, a ripple of change began to take shape. Elijah's phone buzzed. He checked the screen. An incoming call from someone unexpected. Colonel Carter. The voice on the other end was deep, authoritative. "This is General Adams. I heard about the situation at the airport." Elijah stepped straighter. General Adams was a high-ranking officer known for his non-nonsense leadership and fierce loyalty to his men. Elijah had served under him briefly during a joint operation years ago. General Elijah said, "Yes, sir, it's been complicated." "I can imagine," Adams replied grimly. "We're not going to let this slide. I'm pulling some strings. Give me little time." Minutes after the call ended, the airport staff began scrambling. Word had come down from high places, and now the tone toward Elijah shifted. Airline representatives approached him, offering IES that felt hollow. Colonel Carter, one of the attendants, stammered nervously, "We deeply regret the inconvenience. Please allow us to upgrade your flight and offer you complimentary access to our VIP lounge." Elijah met the man's gaze, his expression unreadable. "I don't need an upgrade. I need my flight and the casket to depart on time." The attendant he hated clearly caught off guard by Elijah's refusal. "Of course, sir, we're doing everything we can to expedite the process." Eli Jagavia, Kurt nodded. He wasn't there for apologies or upgrade. She was here to honor a promise. As the airport management scrambled to mitigate the damage, more allies began to emerge. One of them was a senior officer from Elijah's old unit, Lieutenant Colonel Foster. Foster was an older man with silver hair and a commanding presence, though he had retired from active service. Foster still carried the respect of the military community and wielded influence in the upper ranks. When Foster arrived at the airport, it was like a shift in the atmosphere. He strode toward Elijah. "Why?" That purpose, his sharp eyes staking in everything at a glance. Elijah, Foster said, clapping him on the shoulder. Heard they were giving you trouble. Elijah gave a faint smile. It's been a day. Foster shook his head, a flicker of anger in his eyes. Unbelievable, decorated officer on an honorable mission. And this is how they treat you. He turned toward the airline's staff lingering nearby. You'll regret every second of this when we're done. The staff backed away nervously under Faust's stern gaze. He then pulled out his phone and began making calls, rallying other officers and off-eye. Silstow, apply pressure on the airport management. Meanwhile, Elijah received a text message from General Adams. I've contacted the airline's CEO. They're fast-tracking your flight. Hang tight. We've got your appreciated the support. He knew that his focus had to remain steady. He wouldn't rest until Keller was home. A few minutes later, another unexpected figure approached Elijah. It was our representative from the airline's corporate office, his face pale with nerves. Colonel Carter, the man began with a forced smile. We want to sincerely apologize for the treatment you've endured. This is not how we conduct business, and we deeply regret any offense. Cause Elijah's gaze remained steady, his silence heavy with meaning. The man shifted uncomfortably under the weight of that. We've arranged for everything. The representative continued. The flight is ready for priority boarding, and the casket will be handled with the utmost care. We'd like to offer you our deepest apologies, and hope you'll accept our gesture of goodwill. Elijah gave his low note. I wants to get my friend home, he said, quietly. That's it. The representative exhaled, relieved that Elijah wasn't escalating the confrontation. Of course, Colonel, the flight crew is standing by and will ensure everything goes smoothly from here. As Elijah stood, Foster gave him a knowing look. They're scrambling now, but you made your point. You've got people watching your back. Elijah gave a faint smile. I didn't ask for all this. I know, Foster said, but sometimes the right battles find you. Elijah had learned long ago that not every fight was fought on the battlefield. Some battles came when you least expected the man. Victory was measured not by medals but by honor. As they made their way to the gate, Elijah caught sight of the protesters outside through the large airport windows. People held signs, chanted slogans, and demanded accountability. For a brief moment, Elijah felt a flicker of something bittersweet, gratitude for their support, but sadness that this battle even needed to be fought. They turned toward the gate agent, who offered a nervous smile. The flight is ready when you are. Colonel Elijah nodded. On Slatunjit, moving with Foster walking beside him and the weight of Keller's memory guiding him, Elijah stepped forward, one step closer to home, one step closer to honoring a promise. The planet touched down on the tarmac of Keller's hometown. Just as the first light of dawn painted the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, Elijah Carter stared out the window, the exhaustion weighing on him. Though his posture remained disciplined, his thoughts were fixed on the solemn task ahead. He had made it through the endless delays, confrontations, and public spectacle. Now, the final step awaited, delivering his friend back to the family and giving Keller the farewell he deserved. The flight crew treated him with deference, but Elijah was too focused to care. As soon as the plane came to halt, the casket was carefully unloaded and transferred onto a waiting military transport vehicle. Elijah stood on the runway, straightening the flag draped across the casket. One last time his fingers ran along the fabric, smoothing every crease. We're here, brother, he whispered. We made it. At the gates of the small-town cemetery, Keller's family awaited, their face heavy with grief. His mother stood at the front, clutching a worn photograph of her son in uniform. This was enough to break even the strongest heart, but Elijah held his emotions in check. His duty now was to honor Keller, just as she had promised. Keller's father, an older man with silver hair and tired eyes, approached Elijah and extended a hand. Colonel Carter, he said, his voice trembling, thank you for bringing him home. Elijah shook the man's hand firmly but gently. It was my honor, sir. He was my brother in every way that mattered. Mrs. Keller, tears streaming down her face, stepped forward. Next, he always spoke so high. Glyaph, she whispered, he said, if anything ever happened to him, you'd bring him back. Elijah swallowed hard, the note in his throat almost unbearable. I promised him, Amand. You never break my promises. The family nodded, gratitude with sorrow in their expressions. They gestured towards the procession that was ready to move toward the burial site. The cemetery was quiet. The air heavy with reverence. Rows of American flags lined the path leading to the plot, reserved for Keller. Soldiers in dress uniforms stood at attention, rifles slung over their shoulders. Local residents had gathered as well, some holding flags, others wiping away tears. Word had spread about Elijah's journey and the obstacles she had faced along the way. The community had come together not only to honor Keller, but also to express their gratitude for Elijah's dedication and sacrifice. The casket was carried toward the gravet. The somber notes of taps filled the air, played by a lone bugler. The mournful melody echoed through the trees, a final farewell to a soldier who had given everything for his country. Elijah stood at attention beside the casket, his hand raised in a crisp salute. Every movement was precise, every gesture deliberate. This was not just a routine ceremony, it was a personal goodbye to a friend, a brother in arms. When the casket was lowered into the ground, Elijah remained standing, the weight of his promises settling deep within him. He knew that bringing Keller home was only part of the journey. Now came the hardest part, letting go. As the ceremony drew to a close, Elijah stepped forward to deliver a final message. His voice was low and steady, though each word carried the weight to memory. Spadel San Los Thomas Keller was more than just a soldier. Elijah began. He was a friend, a brother, and a man of honor on the battlefield. We relied on each other in ways that only soldiers can understand. He saved my life more times than I can count. And when he fell, I promised I would bring him home. Today I keep that promise. He paused, his gazes weeping over the gathered crowd. Keller didn't care about the color of my skin or the stripes on my uniform. He cared about the man standing beside him. And that's the way it should always be. There was a moment of silence, the only sound of leaves in the breeze. Elijah lowered his hand from his salute and took a step back, allowing Keller's family to place flowers on the casket. As the family and community members began to disperse, several townspeople approached Elijah to express their gratitude. Many had heard about the ordeal he had faced at the airport and were appalled by the disrespect shown to a man of his stature. "We won't forget what they did to you," one man said. "It's not right, and we'll make sure something changes." Another woman, wiping tears from her eyes, added, "You brought them home. Me, Colonel, that means everything to us." Elijah gave the man out, his expression somber but grateful. It wasn't the recognition he had sought, but it was a reminder that the fight for respect was far from over. Later that evening, Elijah joined Keller's family at a small gathering in their home. It was a quiet affair, just close friends and family reminiscing about the man Keller had been. They shared stories, laughed through tears, and found comfort in each other's presence. Keller's mother pulled Elijah aside at one point, pressing a folded letter into his hand. "This for you before he left," she whispered. "He wanted you to have it in case, well, you know." Elijah unfolded the letter with trembling hands. It was short but meaningful, written in Keller's familiar scrawl. "Elijah, if you're reading this, it means you kept your promise. Thank you for getting me home. Brother, I'll see you on the other side." The words hit Elijah harder than any battlefield. Wound folded the letter carefully and placed in his pocket Keller's dog tag. "I'll see you on the other side," Elijah whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The night ended with Akidoist in Keller's memory. As Elijah raised his glass, he knew that despite the obstacles and the injustices she'd faced, he had done what he's taught to do. He had brought this brother home, and in doing so he had found a measure of peace. The next morning, Elijah woke early, the first rays of sunlight streaming through the window of the small guest room where he had stayed. His body was weary, but his mind was sharp. Keller was home, the mission was complete. But the events that had unfolded at the airport still weighed heavily on him. He knew that what happened wasn't just a series of unfortunate events, it was a reflection of something far deeper, a system that treated men like him with suspicion even when they wore the uniform of their country. Elijah sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, staring at Keller's dog tag in his hand. The fight wasn't over, not yet. Keller's burial had been a personal victory. But what he experienced at the airport demanded something more. It was time to act. Later that morning, Elijah's phone buzzed with a series of messages and missed calls. News of the airport incident had continued to spread. Media outlets were picking up the story, and the protests that began outside the airport were now gaining national attention. Activists demanded answers, and the public's outrage grew louder by the hour. To Elijah's surprise, his inbox was flooded with messages from military personnel, soldiers, officers, and veterans of all races. Some expressed their disgust at how Elijah had been treated, while others shared their own experiences with discrimination within the ranks. It was clear to Elijah that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a much larger problem. A message from General Adams appeared at the top of his inbox. "We're launching an official inquiry. This will not be swept under the rug." Elijah exhaled slowly, knowing that while inquiries and investigations were important, they were only the beginning. He wasn't content with waiting for others to take action. He needed to do more. Back in Keller's hometown, Elijah met with local veterans and community leaders. Many of them expressed their desire to help, and together they began organizing a campaign not just for justice for Elijah, but for systemic changes to ensure that another soldier would face what he had. "We need accountability," Elijah said during one of their meetings, "not just from the airport staff, but from the military itself. This isn't just about me, it's about every soldier who's been disrespected and disregarded because of how they look." The campaign quickly gained momentum with the support of military organizations, activists, and media outlets. Elijah's story became a rallying cry. Social media movements like #Justice for Reed and #Respect All Soldiers trended. Nationwide, public figures began weighing in, and demands for reform echoed across the country. Meanwhile, the airport launched an internal investigations. Several employees were placed on leave and the head of airport security was forced to resign. And the airline issued a public apology, though many criticized it as being too little too late. Elijah received a personal letter from the airline's CEO, apologizing for the mistreatment and promising to implement new policies to prevent similar incidents in the future. It was a small step, but Elijah knew it wasn't enough. The military also responded to the growing outcry. General Adams publicly acknowledged the need for change and announced new training programs aimed at addressing racial bias within the ranks. Elijah was invited to participate in the initiative, lending his voice to the effort to reshape the culture of the military from within. "It's not going to be easy," Adams told Elijah during one of their conversations, "but it's necessary and we need people like you." Leading the charge, Elijah nodded, "I've faced tougher battles." Adams smiled, "That's what I was counting on." As the weeks passed, Elijah's life slowly returned to a new normal. The campaign for justice continued to gain traction and meaningful changes began to take shape in both the airport and the military. Elijah knew that the fight wasn't over, but for the first time he felt that progress was within reach. The next morning a letter arrived at Elijah's doorstep. It was from Keller's family. Mrs. Keller's handwriting was neat and delicious. "Liberate," the words filled with warmth and gratitude. "Elijah, thank you for bringing our boy home. Your dedication meant the world to us, but more than thank you for standing up when it would have been easier to stay silent. Tom would be proud of you." Elijah read the letter. Twice his heart heaved with emotion. He folded it carefully and placed it alongside Keller's dog tag, a reminder of the bond they had shared, and the promise he had kept in the quiet moments that followed. Elijah reflected on everything that had transpired. The road had been long and filled with obstacles, but it had carried Keller home with honor. Along the way he had faced prejudice, injustice, and unnecessary challenges, but he had also found all his unexpected supporters and the strength to push forward. And though Keller's chapter had ended, Elijah knew that his own story was far from over. The fight for justice would continue for himself, for Keller, and for every soldier who had ever been judged by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. Elijah stood by the window gazing out the horizon. A new day was dawning, full of challenges yet to come, but Elijah was ready. He had kept this promise and he would keep fighting for what was right with Keller's dog tag still in his hand. Elijah whispered quietly to himself, "We're not done yet, brother, not by long shot." And with that, a step forward, ready to meet whatever battles lay ahead, not as a victim, but as a soldier, a brother, and a man of unbreakable resolve. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay with us for the next one. And while you're here, check out our other videos. There's always more to explore. Where are you watching? NG from, let us know in the comments below.